Welcome back, I'm Kim Bailey and this is Floral Art Review. This week we're looking at a design with the title Dispersion. And this was done for an online competition and just trying to remember, it was probably late 2020, early 2021. And the idea of it, each of the classes had a single word as the class title, which was a great innovation at the time, not one that I had come across before. And it was being judged, it was a competition for a club based in South America, and so also an area where I hadn't competed previously, so I was quite excited to be able to submit a design. It was judged on the image by a panel of judges. We didn't get any real feedback, so I'm interested to see what feedback I get today from Design Eye. But in looking at the image now, I know exactly what I was hoping to do with the design. But looking at the image now, I can see some things that are quite jarring, as often happens when I do these videos and I look back on the designs. So my idea for this was to have, when I thought about dispersion, I thought about eggs breaking and opening up, and so that's my idea. And so the eggs in this design are made from paper mache that has been wrapped around an inflated balloon, and then you burst the balloon and pull the balloon bits out, and you're left with that really nice shape. What that does with the design is it gives you mass, so quite a heavy looking area without the weight. So I was able to bring the design up quite high without having to worry too much about the balance of it, because they were obviously quite light and the rest of the plant material was going to anchor it. There is a metal stand that is hidden completely, and so the eggs are on the two arms of the metal stand, and I've left the edges broken as though they've been cracked, and the pieces that have come out of the egg are around the base. The base is actually 2 rounds of garden hose. And for those of you who've done any of my workshops, you will recognise that straight away and know that technique. But it's garden hose that's covered with string and then bound together to give you a bit of a netting effect as a base for designs. The rest of the design, it's sphagnum moss and chrysanthemums. And so I chose the sphagnum moss because I wanted something that had indicated line but was not as smooth as the rest of the design. And it also gave me the opportunity to have things that were hanging down at all sorts of different levels, not quite as structured or as linear as a lot of the designs that I do. In looking at it now, I think that the eggs are too dominant. They are both at the same height, and you know that that's not a good thing, and it is still a little bit top heavy in terms of its visual balance. So what I think I would prefer to do was to make one of the eggs a little bit smaller than the other, bring it down a little bit on one side, and then have the base material come out to balance that visually in terms of looking at the design as a whole. There we have our rundown on how it came together, and I think probably the most interesting thing about that is the technique that I used to make those structures, because you could adapt it for almost anything, any sort of shape that you wanted to think about using the paper mache and then covering it. But the other thing I could have done, although it would have detracted from the eggshell look to it, is to bring some of the sphagnum moss up and around it, or some of the flowers. And I do think that some of the flowers need to be a little bit higher up because they were the yolk of the egg, and so you wouldn't crack 2 eggs together and just have the yolk separate. It would be from the top all the way down. So another visualization that I needed to bring into reality a little bit more clearly. But let's now have a look at what Design Eye, our AI, has said about the principles and elements of design, first of all with this particular design, and then what things I can do to improve it. Looking at form, first of all, this design relies heavily on solid form versus open form. The two massive smooth egg-like spheres at the top represent solid heavy forms. The central column, by contrast, is an open tangled mess, creating a powerful visual juxtaposition. So that is a good result in terms of form, that there is that contrast of forms, and it's quite clearly been designed that way. Texture. The contrast here is extreme. You have the smooth, almost shell-like finish of the upper spheres and the base shards set against the rough, wiry, chaotic texture of the dried sphagnum moss. And that it was a very deliberate choice, that I like to have the contrast in textures. And I felt that even though, if you think about an egg, the shell is smooth and the internal parts of the egg are smooth as well, that having it all smooth was not going to give me the impact of the design that I would like. It would make it very two-dimensional, and I needed the depth in the design to enhance my interpretation. Line. Instead of clean architectural lines, this piece utilises an implied line. The bright yellow chrysanthemums form a meandering broken path down the centre of the design, suggesting a flow or spill of energy or dispersion from the top to the bottom. And that's very true. But I do think that I should have brought that line of the yellow up a little bit higher and into both parts of the top part, both parts of the eggshells, so that it was coming out of both eggshells, because at the moment it sort of starts in the middle. It's losing its connection with the top part of the design. Colour. The palette is highly restricted and effective. The dominant neutral tones, creams and browns, act as a canvas, allowing the intense saturated yellow of the chrysanthemums to become the absolute focal point. That's very true, and that's why I need those colours, that yellow, to go up and into the egg shells as well, because it just cuts the design in half. Otherwise, a top half and a bottom half, a top half without the yellow and a bottom half with the yellow. And I need to incorporate and bring that colour through the design. Balance. The design utilises a tense symmetrical balance. The two large spheres are equally weighted on either side of the central axis. However, because they are positioned so high, the piece feels intentionally top-heavy, creating a feeling of imminent release or bursting. I like that idea. I like the fact that someone independent has seen that it is balanced, even though they appear to be suspended in air, that they're not, it doesn't look like it's going to fall over, I guess is what it is. But I just would like to see a little bit more of a spread at the base to visually balance the design a little bit better, make it more symmetrical. It's not, and that's why it's tense symmetrical, because there's tension in the symmetry that is there. I'm back, and yes, I'm in different clothes because it's a different day. The microphone went flat yesterday, and I didn't know until I started doing the editing of the video. So I'm back today with a fully charged microphone and ready to finish off this video for you. So let's have a look now at contrast. The entire concept is built on contrast: smooth versus rough in the texture, solid versus airy in the form, and neutral versus vibrant in the colour. This, to me, is probably too much contrast. When I look at it now, I think that I should have stuck with the contrast in texture, which is a strength of mine, and the contrast in form, because that lends itself to the contrast in textures as well. The issue of the contrast in colour is tied up with the placement of the yellow flowers as well, because what we have is two dominant structures at the top of the eggshells and this line of yellow flowers, and they're competing for attention. And so it doesn't help in the interpretation of the class title, because we can't see, if we use the yellow flowers as the dominant area and we focus on those, then we see that there's contrast in the other colours that are around it, then it reinforces that the yellow part is the important part, because the contrast is there in the colour. But the yellow doesn't tell us the story. of the class title because it's not dispersed, it's a very straight line. And I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit further down the track. But so what I needed to do was think about this particular part of the design, and it's not just what we get reinforcing with these videos is that we don't look at the whole design, we look at those principles and elements and we see how each of those is working within this design, and is there anything that is creating a problem in the design that we've overlooked because we're focusing too much on something else. So a good way of reinforcing those principles and elements and how you need to think about all of them in every design is to do these analyses and to go through them and think about critically about what you've done with your design and where it's fallen down and where it's worked well. So we go to dominance and emphasis now. The massive spheres dominate the silhouette, but the bright yellow floral path dominates the viewer's immediate attention. So it's reinforcing what I just said, that we don't know, as a viewer, we don't know where to look. It's creating this confusion in our minds. If we look at the yellow and just at the yellow, it doesn't tell us the story because they're not dispersed. So the interpretation is lost. If we look at the spheres, we understand that something is happening there, and so we follow through the design to see if we can see more of the story. And that's what we need to do. We're giving our viewers a path to follow through the design that helps them understand the interpretation of the class title. And that just doesn't happen with the way I've done this particular design. So proportion and scale. The massive scale of the top spheres relative to the base and the central column is what makes this piece so dramatic. It challenges traditional floral proportions to achieve an artistic interpretation of the title. A very nice way of saying it's out of proportion and scale. And it is. The proportion in terms of the plant material placements to the spheres is not right, and it would be a simple matter to balance that out by having the base more covered in the sphagnum moss and having the yellow flowers more scattered through the design. The scale also would be helped by both of those things, and the scale probably would be helped more so by the scattering of the yellow flowers through the design, because at the moment we've got this big dominant area at the top, and then we've got this massive stuff in the middle, and then we've got this yellow line, and then we've got this tiny, in relative terms, tiny base, and there's no connection between them that is smooth and easy to understand. So a real area that I needed to think about in terms of this design. Don't think it's helped by the fact that it's photographed on a black background, because that only emphasises the problems in terms of proportion and scale. So it's good for review, but not so good for judging. Let's have a look at some of the suggestions now. Number one, the spill effect. If the concept is dispersion, things scattering or spreading from a central point, the yellow flowers currently feel a bit constrained to a single vertical column, allowing a few smaller yellow blooms to scatter outward into the moss near the base, or even attaching one or two tiny blooms near the cracked openings of the spheres would enhance the outward movement. That's very true, and I think that that's probably one of the easiest things that I could do to improve this design, would be to have that yellow more prevalent through the whole of the design, because I think I said earlier that it looks like it's two parts of the design, the top part, and then there's the bottom part that's got the yellow in it. And even with the bottom part having the yellow in it, the yellow is not dispersed across the whole of the base. So a big area for improvement in that suggestion. Base integration. The transition where the moss meets the woven ring at the bottom is quite sudden. The shards of shell are a great touch, but weaving some of the moss further out into the ring structure would help ground the heavy top mass more securely to the base. And that's very true, and I can see it more and more as I look at the design. My eyes want to go out further in the design. They want to see what else is balancing that top part of the design. And it's also about the flow of the design. You know, we're encouraging people to start at those at the top of the design and flow through, and then then it stops all of a sudden, and that's not a natural or organic movement. We want to flow back out past that base. So definitely have to do that. Tension in the spheres. The two large spheres are very identical in size and height, creating a slight asymmetry. Perhaps having one sphere slightly lower or angled differently than the other could add dynamic tension, making the design feel more organic and less rigid. And once again, I think that's a very good suggestion. At the moment, the more I look at it, the more it looks like Mickey Mouse ears to me. And so moving one of those spheres at a different angle, having it a little bit lower down, would make it look more natural, more organic, and then incorporating that slight adjustment in those placements with the scattering of the yellow flowers and bringing the base out a little bit more is going to completely change the flow and the visual balance of this design and make it far more interpretive of that class title than it is at the moment. It's a very stilted interpretation at the moment. All good suggestions, all ones that I would certainly consider. So there you have our analysis for this week for dispersion. You can see how useful these analyses are in terms of looking back at previous designs that you've done. It doesn't have to be for a competition that's upcoming. It can be just that you would like to know a little bit more about this design, or perhaps you had a design that you felt was a good design and you'd like to know a little bit more about the areas where you could make it a better design. And that is the value of this service, is that it doesn't matter when you did the design or what you want to learn, it's going to provide you with information based on those principles and elements of design that are so important for any design that we do. And it gives you the opportunity to learn at your pace rather than have to go to a competition and all the anxiety that's associated with that. Hope you get feedback on your particular design, not just general feedback, and then be able to revisit that feedback, read it again, look at the design again, and then use that information to think about the designs that you're doing at that particular time. I'll leave you with all of that. Talked enough for today and yesterday. I'll be back next week with another design. I'm Kim Bailey, and this is Floral Art Review.